All right, now we're on to the next one. This is a double whammy here with the next version of tiering, or the next the next take on tiering, and as well as the dynamic data relocation for cache tiering. All things tiering. So, Sam, you want to start with yours, and then we can hear from the Intel guys on theirs as well.
Sure. Okay. So can you guys hear me?
Yep.
An oft-requested feature is an ability for the OSD to offload cold data, not necessarily to another Rados pool in the same data center, but to something completely different and hopefully cheaper. Like, for example, a cheaper, crappier Rados cluster in a different data center, or, I don't know, S3 or something. So the way the current cache tiering system works is we pretty much just make librados calls to the next pool down. But in principle, we could use really anything else to write the objects out. We don't actually need it to be a Rados pool. So the idea would be to create a plugin system where you could define a backing pool that hands off to whatever your specified plugin is. And the tiering agent, this wouldn't really be a cache tier, it would be more of a tier, would use this opaque plugin interface to actually do the object emotion, and it would store within the Rados tier a metadata object redirect, indicating which plugin was used to offload it, and some information from the backing system about where it went. So I have here a very low thought crack at what the interface might look like. The details aren't particularly important. I think the only useful bits are that the interface is append only, and you don't get to define the name of the object, you get an opaque handle back. I think this might be useful to allow the backing tier to cram placement information in the handle it gives you. Let's see. And similarly, read is stream-based, no seeking. So you promote a whole object or nothing at all. This makes it a little bit. This may make it easier for backends to implement this interface efficiently.
So presumably, you could make this so that the implementation, if it were Rados, for example, it says it gets to decide what the name is, but it actually chooses the name that you provided.
Yeah, I mean, for Rados, that part isn't important. This is more for a system where, for example, you don't have Rados-style fancy dynamic object placement, and you actually want to put something like the data center it's in the name.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know if that part's useful. I was hoping to get feedback on that. Or in S3, it might indicate the, what do they call it, the region, zone, whatever.
Yeah, you might hand it off to a tape, and it gives you like which tape in the library it ended up on.
Which brings me to one of the questions.
Yeah, sorry. I think systems like WAS too also have that model where they give you back the identifier. WAS is I can't remember what company it is. The one in.
But yeah, okay.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
There was no reason for us for us to impose a name on. At least I can't think of a good reason for us to impose a name on the back end. So might as well let the back end choose a name. I also don't want these to be overwritable. At least. Again, I think it would be probably easier for a system like a Rados erasure coding pool not to allow partial overwrites. So objects are append only and immutable once closed. So one thing that is a question for me is there are slow backends like S3, and then there are hyper slow backends like Glacier or a tapebot. Do we care about extending this plugin interface to be capable of handling something like a tapebot? It would mean that Rados would have to be able to propagate some kind of an in progress error code to clients that indicates that I'm working on it, check back later. Because with Glacier, it might take 4 hours to retrieve an object, I think. Yeah. I read that one time. Yeah. Tapebots similarly take time to get at an object.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, so this is another one of those things where I don't think we sort of move on it until someone gave us a good reason to either do it or not do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a question we'd want a motivating use case for. Similarly with go ahead.
I think for a tape bot, I mean the latencies are like tens of seconds to minutes. I mean, I think that's excruciating, but tolerable. And
I thought it was
the one you get
hours.
for a tape robot, it wouldn't be hours; it would be minutes. Okay. But I mean, if you have like an HSM type system where you have just random files in your system that have been archived up to tape, and you go try to read them, like users kind of expect that it's going to take. They know that there's a tape on the back end, so they'll just wait. And the file systems that are sitting on top don't. It's not like the system calls return E in progress and they try to reopen the file.
Oh, no.
Later. They just block.
We have to return E in progress because we can't let requests build up on the OSD like that.
I see. Oh, I see. Okay.
So while this is in progress, we're going to return an error to the client. The client's free to block whatever it wants to block, but we can't have the messages sitting on the OSD.
So this would be extra exchanges between Liberatos and the OSD, but the Liberatos call itself would still be blocking.
I think the Liberatos call itself returns E in progress, and anything above that wants to block can block.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't want Liberatos even keeping track of outstanding in progress object promotions either. If that's a thing the client thinks is important, it can probably just do that. I mean, for something like this, polling on an interval of like tens of seconds is probably fine, and that's good enough. We don't need to keep enough state for a notify. At least that's my feeling.
Okay. Yeah, I would start simple, but we could go there too.
I don't want to. I really don't. It seems simple, except that we're building up all these requests. That happens enough on the OSD as it is. I think going forward, any designs we come up with should really minimize anything the OSD holds in memory. And it's not really that much more complicated. It just means that Liberatos returns an E in progress, and if the client library wants to poll, it can do that. Polling's easy to implement anyway, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
So another question is, how does this interact with snapshots, if at all? In principle, it's not really that hard. We just write all of the relevant snapshot information into the metadata object, and that even allows us to do snapshot trims without promoting. But it'll be kind of tedious, so that's extra work we'll have to do. Could also just disallow snapshots. So another one is, because of the anonymous object name nature of this, if you open an object, start writing, and then there's a peering interval, we will have lost that information. So we probably need to write into the PG log that we're starting a demotion to one of these things, so that the next primary can look backwards through the log and clean up after any canceled promotions or demotions.
Yep.
Those are all the gotchas I've got. I don't know if anyone else has any other ones or use cases that are missed. That's the big one.
So Sam,
Hey, Sam.
Alphabetical order.
Go ahead.
Who's trying to talk? Is that Somnath?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's me. Can you?
Mhm.
Can you hear what I say?
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Shikang Wang, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I have a question. If we want to do this as another tier of clustering, why we don't do this as a new backend store? We can implement this whatever the tab code or whatever others as a new backend store, and then we create a pool as the code storage pool, and then make a cache tier on top of it.
Okay. So the main reason is that there isn't a reason to do that. So if you're using S3, for example, it already handles object placement. There's no reason to partition the namespace of S3 objects into dummy PGs that only proxy off to S3. That doesn't seem worthwhile to me. We might as well have the cache tier simply write directly, or the tier write directly to the backing store. The other reason is this is a little bit different. This isn't really that similar to cache tiering. It's similar in that it acts like a tier, But unlike cache sharing, we don't use the absence of an object to indicate that you should look at the next tier down. The top level tier would actually contain a metadata object for every object, if that makes sense. So it would act like a metadata cache. But to answer your main question, I don't see an advantage to doing that. Maybe I'm missing something.
Maybe. Okay.
Well, I mean, so you're.
Got another.
Go
Yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, so
just want to ask another question.
Okay.
Oh,
Go ahead.
the data you upload, the data uploaded to the cold storage, and should we able to? I mean, when the data is uploaded to the cold storage, should we, the data on the cold storage be able to read from some other client? I mean, the data is recognized as by someone others.
So that's another question.
Or we should.
The way I've described this interface, there isn't really any relationship between the name that the backend gets or generates and the name for the object in the front end. And there's not, that is in the Rados pool. There's also not necessarily any really good relationship between the name the object has in Rados and its actual user-facing manifestation. If it's a Rados GW object, for example, it's like the head object is named after the user visible S3 name. That's the Rados GW S3, not the backend S3. Sorry for choosing that example. But the other objects, if it's a big object, are named after some kind of monotonically increasing sequence number and something else. So the only way to do that would be to propagate some kind of information about what this object is and how it relates to the higher level user-facing object. Because I mean, does that make sense? If it's a Rados object and the user has control over what the object is, then maybe it's a little easier. So I guess for me that's the tricky part. It's not clear to me how you, because by the time it got to Rados in the first place, it's already pretty well digested. Okay, so basically whatever process was looking at the cold storage and wanted to perform reads would have to A, be capable of tolerating the fact that some of the pieces of the thing that it's looking for might not be there because they haven't been demoted yet. And two, it needs to be able to reconstruct the jigsaw puzzle. So it would have to know what the user-facing application was and how it was naming objects.
Okay.
Yep.
It seems like a desirable property though, so you have a way around that though, or an interface change that would allow us to do that more cleverly. That might be useful.
Yes, Sam, maybe a dumb question, but the RGW that tiering that user is planning to implement, right? So it's these different buckets from different storage. So how we actually will be implementing that without this infrastructure on the OSD side, like on different pool, will be serving different buckets, maybe.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Yeah, so basically what I'm saying is that it's probably related to what Yehuda is actually trying to implement on that S3 bucket, right? On that tiering, the proper tiering on that, even the cold storage and all. So,
wait, are you talking about a thing Rados GW is implementing?
Yeah, so that actually probably needs support of your tiering underlying, right?
Not necessarily. I don't actually know how it works. Sorry, maybe you could explain it.
But even that without that, right? So if somebody wants to put say data on some different pool, which is actually probably tens of seconds to access it, right? So that could be the use case of this, putting different objects on different storage. Right?
So am I understanding correctly that Rados GW is implementing a feature where you might specify that a bucket is located on a different kind of storage than Rados?
But otherwise, how actually they will be saying that if somebody says that, okay, I want this object will be accessed only once in a year, right? So they have to locate it in some storage that actually it's very frequently accessed, or it will be eventually migrated to a storage which will be very slow. So how they actually it will be implemented without the help of this OSD level support?
I don't know. I'm not sure how the Rados GW thing works. So so basically you're saying Rados GW is talking, or Yehuda is talking about adding to Rados GW a policy system where you can say that this object will only be read once a year, and you're asking how you can implement that without help from the OSD.
Yeah.
Okay, so Rados GW has the freedom to write to any pool it wants. So from its point of view, if it has a replicated pool and an erasure-coded pool available to it, there's absolutely no reason it couldn't just choose to write to the erasure-coded pool instead. It doesn't need OSD help for that. Similarly, it could write to S3 on its own. That would be a little bit pointless, but it could. This is more for a system where you're not either Rados GW doesn't know up front which objects will be cold, and you'd like over time the cold objects to be demoted, or a system where the front end simply isn't that clever, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I understand that intelligent decision that on the OSD part. But if somebody says that I want these objects to be stored on a pool, say on the Ceph device, right? So will not Ceph support that in future?
Sure, Rados GW would just write to that pool instead.
Yeah. So I think that's the same question that Wang was asking, right? So if we can configure a pool on top of a Ceph device, right? And it takes a tens
Oh, I
of
see.
seconds to
So
access
no,
that.
my argument against that is that Rados GW wouldn't write to Rados in that case. It would write directly to the cold storage system.
Yeah, but if you were returning say something like try again or something, right? So
Something like what?
so you're saying that OSD will be returning some in progress, right? That returns status to the upstream. So in that, so why we're actually planning to do that? Why not actually wait till these objects we retrieve and then send it across, even if it's a tens of seconds? What is actually limiting us to do that? Is there any timeout or something in there?
No, the in progress thing is only about like a tape bot or Amazon Glacier, where it simply takes a preposterous amount of time to actually retrieve an object. So yeah, we could just wait for the I/O to complete. Maybe that's the best thing to do. But the question was basically, does it make sense to extend the interface to deal with that? To instead return an error and say, here's a handle you can use to check on the progress of this operation. Come back later. Yeah, maybe it makes more sense to just accept that it'll take a while and use the same interface. But I don't see how that relates to Rados GW.
You might have it might be perfectly reasonable to have all the ingest come into a Rados pool, and then slowly in the background that gets bled off to something really slow. That's actually the typical model for tape, because that gives you like the random mutable objects, and then they get staged out after an hour or something. So I think that then you might have that like a pool policy that does that. Maybe you set a hint when you're doing the put that this object is going to be cold, and so you hint that to Rados so it knows which of the menu of slow backends to use.
Yeah, so my question is that what's the advantage of doing a hint instead of actually client directly saying that I don't need that, I want to put it to say slow archival. Directly.
You're saying you would like it to not be stored on the regular tier in the first place. You would like it to be directly offloaded.
Yeah, so basically, I can create a pool on a slow storage, and then RGW will probably write it directly to that storage rather than this hint, giving hint to the OSD, and OSD will actually over the time storing it to the storage, the folder storage.
Well, if the pool is on the slow storage, then it's already there. There isn't anything else to do.
Yeah, so
I don't quite understand.
No, that's what my question is actually. What's the use case of this, like giving a hint and then actually OSD doing that rather than we have a tool that that we can create a slower device on top of
this is for a whole different. This is for a whole different level of slowness. This is for a level of slowness so slow that it doesn't make sense to run Rados on it. Basically, you use the Rados pool as a metadata cache for the even more monumentally slow backend tape or S3 system. That's what we're talking about here. Does that make sense?
So there's a second half to the session. There's a second blueprint.
Okay.
From Xiuqiang, dynamic data relocation for cache steering.
Right.
Are you here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, as we have talked part of this in the previous blueprint.
Okay.
What I want to do is to implement a multi-tier inside multi-tier storage inside Ceph. That currently we have cache tier and then we have base tier. Maybe later we can do a multi-tiers. We have the hot tier, maybe the warm tier, and the normal tier, the cold tier, maybe as many as we want.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can what we can do on these multiple tiers that we can dynamically relocate data between these tiers, and then we can do it manually or do it automatically. Yes, this is what we want to do.
So I think what Sam is talking about gives you the third tier at least, right? So you'd have the base tier, which would be the warm, the cache would be the hot, and you would point off to something colder.
Another one.
We haven't really contemplated having
I don't know.
multiples yet.
I don't know. The current implementations support them. Maybe we can let's see the cache tiering. We have three pools. Say we have three pools, and then the first one is the cache tier of the second one. The second one is the cache tier of the third one. Do we support right now? Do we support this right now? We have. I haven't tried that yet.
A cache tier of a cache tier?
Maybe we can support it already. Yeah.
Not yet.
A cache tier is a cache tier of another tier. Oh, not yet.
Not a cache of a cache.
If we can support this, I think we can.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you can do some work to support this, right?
Yeah, I'm less sure about layering caches. But I think definitely once you get down to the base tier, having lots of additional tiers, I think makes sense. I mean, the key thing is that for any object, you have to go somewhere to decide where it's located, right? So that's effectively your metadata pool or something that says where the object is. And that's effectively what the base tier is. It just could also actually store the object itself. So you can imagine that you could have, a 30-tier system where you go to the base pool and look at the pointer, and it tells you which other tier to go look in. Except that what Sam is describing, they're sort of immutable. Once you follow that pointer, it's a read-only copy, and you have to pull it back out in order to modify it. So you're basically limited to a cache tier and a base tier as the only ones that can accept writes, and then everything else is sort of a colder tier.
So you think 3 tiers is enough?
Well, 2 writable tiers and then as many cold tiers in sort of the third slot as you want. I mean that's currently what we're describing. I think the question is whether that's sufficiently general to capture all that stuff. I mean, okay, so in your example, having an SSD tier and an HDD tier and an EC tier, I think that definitely works. Having like a 4th tier of tape, I think it works there too. The only restriction is that what Sam's describing means that in order to move it from erasure coded to tape backup, it would actually the base tier would read it in and then write it back out again. And it's not clear where it would just what would make it decide that, how it would know that it's so cold that it's just gonna move it off the tape. Maybe some external hint or agent or something would have to come along and say this data set is ancient, and that's probably maybe just the user would have to do it.
Right. Yeah. That is the second part of my blueprint. Yeah, we can do some automatically, or yeah, maybe it's hard to do automatically, but we can manually to relocate the data to the code tier in the client side using some command lines for, such as for RBD, you can add some command in the RBD to send a volume to ping or unping a volume. Yeah, I think we talked about ping the volume in the previous blueprint. And then you have a question for that if we do this, when we don't do that, we get another pool and then send the data to the SSD pool, right? Yeah, but sometimes we want to unpin this hot data. Say if we have a video, we want to pin it in the cache tier, and then later maybe it is become unhot. We want manually to unpin it in the cache tier.
Yeah.
And then, but if in your case you want to remove all the data from the SSD pool to another pool, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. Before, the example was like a database that you know is always going to be hot, and in that case, just put it in the other pool. But I think in the video example, then that makes a lot of sense. Or you know something is about to be hot, you pin it, and then you know it's going to be. So I think that makes sense. Like having a pin operation, that seems pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even in the two layers. Go ahead.
I mean, the other half of this is that I think that the hints that that we've already added, I think also will give you most of what you need, right? We want to add an additional pin and unpin.
Yeah,
but
I mean
the
hint is, you mean the do not need or will need those hints?
Yeah, will need and don't need and no cache and all that. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we can just sort of extend that set.
Two more.
Yeah, I mean, maybe pin and unpin are explicit separate operations. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's better to expose this as another operations.
Yeah, because it's persistent.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of coming back to Sam's deep in a conversation with some now. If you're still here, Sam,
I am. Sorry, I just couldn't hear him over the mic at all.
Yeah. You might invest in a new microphone, Somnath. It's pretty muffled. So the one thing that I probably should have done, but didn't, is contrast what you wrote up, Sam, with what we sort of dreamt up forever ago in like I think Firefly CDS with the cold tiering. Did you by chance look at that one?
The only real difference is they actually cover kind of disjoint areas. I haven't read it recently, but if I recall, they covered disjoint areas. That one was more about policies for or choices for how to implement policies, which we still need here. So all of that is still applicable here. The only contribution here is that we might not use a Rados pool as the cold tier. That's the only difference.
So that's definitely a big difference. But I think the other one is so this is the Rados redirects. Let me post the link in the chat. The other difference is, I think in this original proposal, you could, I can't remember what it is, because I think you could actually write to the back end.
Yeah.
Or
So
maybe, I don't know. It was complicated. I just remember that there were all these PG log events, and yeah, because we were allowing writes to the cold tier basically. I think that's the main difference. And what you're doing is simpler than that. It just, if you touch it with a write, it has to promote it. That's all right, Sam?
Okay. I guess that's okay. So there might be an intermediate system where we do know something about the backing tier, and we can be more clever. It's not clear to me that it seems to me that overlaps kind of a lot with the current cache tiering implementation.
Yeah.
The only real difference is redirect objects. So how much do we get by having redirect objects? Or how much do we lose by having them, I suppose. Redirect objects are kind of nice to have, actually.
I mean, that's what you're proposing, basically, right? That it's just
well, you have to have them here, because the system,
Yeah.
so we need to maintain Rados' own metadata using these objects. But if we do the cache string approach, we're using the backing pool to encode the Rados level metadata, knowing that we can recover it during promote.
Mhm.
But here we wouldn't even have control over the object name, so we have to write at least that down.
Yeah. Which is right. So it's a redirect. I guess I don't see the
The what?
I'm not sure I see the difference.
Oh no, sorry, it is a redirect. That's what I mean. That's the
okay.
only difference.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Got
No,
it.
sorry. I'm just keep using different words because I can't remember which one I used last time.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, I feel like we should reread this because
Yeah. See, this one involved a lot of cooperation from the backing tier, though. Right. The client was actually able to talk directly to the backing tier in this design, right?
my battery died.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, it's on
Yeah,
my
so
battery died.
In this case, the client is able to talk to the backing tier, and it's able to speak Rados and get Rados-like replies. That wouldn't be true for a tape system.
Got it. Okay.
So in that sense, it's different. So
Oh, that's what it was. That's why it was so complicated. Okay. I remember.
the next question would be: is there value in having the cache tiering system, the Firefly variant of caching, where you're able to get useful information back from the backing tier? Incidentally, you could have a Rados pool in a different data center, which you could talk to like a Rados client. So that there would be a place for that. And yet a third system where it's an opaque plugin and the primary handles all of it. So do we need all three of those, or maybe just the cache tiering and the third one? That's the next part. So we'd want sort of motivating implementations or motivating use cases to make a decision. I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the two scenarios that seem reasonable to me are something like what you proposed, where it's having a plugin that's some other backend. It could be S3. I think looking at something like S3ish like type latencies makes sense, because it could be RGW in another data center, or like a geo-distributed whatever it is. That scenario and another Rados pool. So you could have a cache tier that's SST, a base tier that's replicated HDD, and like a very widely striped erasure coded cold tier that's still Rados. But I mean, if it's a plugin mechanism, then you could just make a Rados plugin, right?
Yeah,
I guess.
but
yeah.
you lose you lose the Radosness of it. So if we actually do want to have the richer protocol that allows the client to receive a redirect and then go talk to the pool directly for performance and or offloading the primary CPU reasons or OSD reasons, then we would need the intermediate Firefly style tiering, which is just about the worst name I could assign to that in this. But
which is this blueprint.
I think everyone knows what I mean.
You're talking about the old redirects. Yeah.
The word tiering has become distressingly overloaded.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Do we have any sort of feedback as far as what makes most sense? What people actually want?
Yeah, because all we've had so far is just sort of vague rumblings that they'd like to be able to put cold data on something cheaper than another Rados pool, which probably isn't enough to go on. So we'd want a more concrete motivator. Anyone? Anyway, mailing list would be a good place if you have ideas later.
Yep.
Or now. Don't let me stop you.
Not all at once.
I like the idea that the base tier is the master copy. It has all the redirects, and if you were having agents running policy, it would run on the base tier.
Yeah, and that's another question. So at this point, the policies get kind of more complicated, because with cache tier, you can really only have one base tier. That's just the way it goes, because we're not keeping any metadata. But with something like this, we could very reasonably have a situation where different kinds of objects for different reasons would be offloaded to different kinds of pool tiers.
Mhm.
So another blueprint for maybe the next CDS would be an idea of how users might be able to specify and extend the placement and tiering engine
Yeah.
decisions, either by exposing it through Rados or through some kind of plugin API that would allow us to extend the existing online or asynchronous cache tiering agent, which again in this case would apply to things other than just the cache tiering implementation. That part is just an asynchronous process which runs in the background and scans objects and does stuff based on that. We would sort of generalize it to that point, I think.
Yep. So the one other thing I want to throw out here while we're talking about this is that the other nice thing about this concept where the base tier has all these pointers, redirects, is that that model also would allow us to do some sort of deduplication underneath it, where that pointer says, oh, this object is composed of this chunk over here and that chunk over there that are in some colder reference counted Rados pool or something where all the deduplicated chunks are stored.
That's true. You don't even lose anything by doing it that way because the you wouldn't want to talk to that pool directly anyway. You'd want to go through the base tier OSDs. That's cool.
And they'd be immutable reference counted.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. And then if you wrote to it, you would promote it again. Either pull it back into the base tier and eliminate the redirect, or right.
For this kind of chilliness, I think the promote on small right isn't going to bother anyone. At least it shouldn't.
Yeah. Well, they'll complain anyway, but
yeah.
Okay. Well.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
So the conclusion is that in my BP, the second part, I mean the relocate data on different tiers part, is that one is worth doing, right? To pin the data on the cache tier and then later maybe unpin it.
I mean, I think pinning and unpinning makes sense to me. What about? Do you have an opinion there, Sam?
I think that is an example of something that could live in the Rados level that we can use to implement smarter policies. We haven't even really begun to explore that kind of interface, so that sounds like a good idea, I think.
Well, that would fit in within the current cache tiering, right? It'd just be like a bit that we set on the object info. That's like
okay. I would prefer it be a little more general, but
or something. But
yeah, that's. I mean, we haven't explored that much, making the policies more expressive, I guess is the right way to say it. So yeah, that seems like a very reasonable thing you'd want to be able to do to an object.
Okay.
Hi Sam, I have one question.
Okay.
So this plugin interface can we make it more intelligent? Saying that if it is a Rados plugin interface, then probably we can allow overrides too. And so plugin tells you that I can override the object or not override it, something like that.
So there are sort of two ways you can go with that. We can make it so that the plugin actually supports both kinds, and the OSD's and it's just up to the OSD to query the plugin as to whether it supports overrides or not, and act accordingly. But the larger question is, it wasn't clear to me that we gained a lot by doing it that way, because the advantage of doing overwrites is kind of lost if you expect a lot of locality in the object anyway. So this is a very, very cold tier, right? This is meant to capture the case where 95% of objects ever written are literally never read. And in that case, as long as those objects never leave the cold tier, you've kind of won, right? Having an extra promote on a small write when you didn't necessarily need it might or might not be that big a deal.
Okay.
So I mean, you're right. It would depend on the use case, and it's also not clear that that wouldn't be a better argument for implementing the level 2 tiering one, where you know it's a Rados pool, and that allows the client to actually be clever and send the write directly to the backing pool. Does that make sense? We outlined a more complicated protocol where the client would negotiate with the base tier or with the hot tier OSD and receive enough information that allows it to conclude that it can safely write to the base tier right now. And in that case, it would be able to do partial writes and also other things that would be faster. Does that make sense? Did you have a use case where it would be useful? Well, okay, so any backend that supported partial overwrites, I suppose, would be the answer to that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the worry is just that as the complexity of the old proposal sort of suggests, anything that involves redirects and the sort of non-linear path through the means that it gets really complicated when you start thinking about all the race
conditions. In this case, you could proxy it.
Yeah, proxying simplifies it, but then
proxying simplifies it a lot, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, no, you're right. If it supported partial writes, we could conditionally proxy the write through to the backend if it was the kind of thing the interface was capable of supporting. So I guess we'd want a use case where that was a win, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's super, well, famous last words, but I don't think it's super complicated. There are a couple of gotchas, like there's no way to, so our OMAP interface is obnoxiously rich compared to most other systems. Most other systems don't give you an arbitrary key value thing, so we get around that here by just streaming it out to a packetized byte stream, out to some general buffer stream in whatever the backing implementation is. But if we allow partial overwrites on an object that has an OMAP payload, then that gets a little complicated. But that's not to say that we couldn't simply have a policy where we record when we offload it, whether or not it has an OMAP payload, and always do a promote if it has one. So it's not really that bad. Does that answer your question at all, or does that make it just more confusing? Still there? Forgot to ask the question.
I think they dropped.
Maybe.
I think so. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, if we're willing to proxy, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
Which we would be.
Yep. I just worry about making proxy everything a proxy, because that can be limiting too. But anyway, I think we have probably enough to chew on. Yep. Okay.
All right. So we're actually into our 15-minute break, but you want to take 5 minutes here and go grab a drink or use facilities or whatever?
Yep. Yeah. Let's take a quick break.
All right. So we'll take 5 minutes and then come back and resume.